Beyond the headlines with the people who make them. This is Explained. Now, here's Steve Fullhart.
By his own admission, Joe Ramirez could have been dead a long time ago. When you hear a soldier say that, your first thoughts may go to a battlefield. For the commandant of Texas A&M's Corps of Cadets, they should go to inner city Houston. Tonight, you'll hear about his father's wartime survival, how A&M saved Ramirez and set him on a path to become a general, and how he is driven as the leader of A&M's Keepers of the Spirit. For transparency, I should note the commandant and I serve on the board of the United Way of the Brazos Valley. He also often works closely with my father, who holds the same position at Virginia Tech, another of the 6 senior military colleges in the country. Ramirez and I began our chat with the recent growth of the Corps. Where is the Corps in your mind right now?
Well, when I first took over as commandant in November 2010, then President Bowen Lofton told me, he gave me one mission. He said, grow the Corps to 2,600 cadets by the year 2020. And the reason he chose 2,600 is because there are 12 dorms on the quad where the Corps lives, and that's how many cadets fit in those 12 dorms, 2,600. So I said, okay, that's my mission, that's what I'll do. This fall, we will be at probably 2,650 to 2,700 cadets, about 800 more than we had when I first started in 2010, which is significant for us. I'm proud of the growth and the fact that we've still maintained good quality. And on top of that, when you look at the academics and where we've come, the overall Corps academic average was a 2.6 my first semester as the commandant. This past semester, the Corps had an overall 3.06.
As far as increasing the size of the Corps, what do you attribute that to? Is that selling the Corps? Is that, the term boots on the ground is overused, but is that getting out there and putting boots into different communities and saying, hey, this is an option for you?
I think it's a combination of many things. I think number one, the academic success that we showed and the emphasis that we showed on academics has helped us bring in some very high quality young men and women that beforehand weren't joining. I mean, they looked at the Corps and said, I can't succeed academically there, so I'm not going to join. We figured that out pretty early, that if we wanted to attract these 1,400 SAT score young men and women, that we needed to show them they could succeed. We have significantly increased our marketing and reaching out to people through a variety of venues, including social media. One of the things you mentioned is we are out visible in the communities now a lot more than we were before. I spend a lot of time on the road traveling. I talk to A&M clubs, I talk to Aggie Moms clubs, I go to high schools, and it's talking to them about not just the Corps cadets in Texas A&M, but the opportunities we can give these young men and women to help prepare them for the future and develop them as leaders. We're a much more attractive organization for a lot more people. I heard somebody say, we had, for example, a female major unit commander a couple years ago, and one of my staff said, 5 years ago, she wouldn't have made it past her freshman year. She wouldn't have stayed because she didn't see the end result. She couldn't see that throughout all the stuff she was going through her freshman year.
So then as a result of having, within the past few years, the first ever African-American student commander and the first 2 back-to-back female student commanders, that you think helps as far as opening doors to folks?
I think it does. I think it shows that anybody can succeed in the Corps Cadets. Anybody.
It's not a white
It's not a white male club anymore. And and the thing is, what I tell people is, when we select cadets to become the Corps commander, major unit commanders, company commanders, their ethnicity and their gender has nothing to do with it. We select the best cadets to fill those positions because we want the best to lead our Corps. And it just happened that Marquise Alexander, our first African American, was the best cadet that year. Last year, Alyssa Mahalki was the best cadet. This year, Cecile Sorio. And we're proud of that. We're proud of that fact and the fact that we can show everybody that the Corps, to be a leader in the Corps Cadets, all you have to do is show us that you can be successful both academically and on the quad, and you can rise to be the Corps commander.
At what point, though, in the past, do you think that Marquise and Alyssa would not be a candidate based on just by circumstance who they are in life?
Yeah. I don't have an answer for that, because to be quite honest with you, when we selected Marquise Alexander to be the Corps commander, we selected him, and the next day my deputy commander came in and said, sir, I don't know if you're aware of this, but Marquise Alexander is the first African American we've ever had as a Corps commander.
So it literally was not a thought.
There wasn't even a thought to me. And I was shocked when he told me that. I went, you gotta be kidding me. He's the first one ever? And he said, yes, sir. He's the first African American.
Still to come on Explained.
The band doesn't march through. Is that your life? Prison?
Yeah, it probably is. And I'd either be in prison or dead. I grew up in inner city Houston, and I happened to be in downtown Houston on a Saturday morning when the Corps Cadets marched in. Corps used to march into Houston for the Rice game every year. And so I happened to be in downtown Houston and saw this organization come marching by. And of course, the first organization to march by was the Fighting Texas Aggie Band. And I played alto sax. I saw that organization march by, and it was one of those wow moments. And I went, man, I don't know what that organization is, but I want to be a part of it. I knew nothing about the Corps. I knew nothing about the military regimen associated with the Corps. I knew nothing about that. I just knew I wanted to be a part of the band.
When you learned more about the Corps, though, did you have pause, or was it always that overriding, I got to march like those guys?
Well, trust me, I had my moments, just like pretty much every freshman. I had my moments where I thought, what have I done? What have I gotten myself into here? But, you know, there's so much more to it than just being in the band. It was the buddies I made, the friends I made, that, you know, guys from all across Texas that, you know, from places I had never heard of before, that became my friends. It was the leader development that went along with that, and the fact that I was learning things that I had never learned before, not the least of which was learning to be patient and learning to control my temper and learning what leadership was truly all about. And one of the overriding factors for me was I was the first member of my family ever to go to college. And I remember walking across campus, you know, going to class going, I can't fail this. I can't quit this, because, you know, that would just crush my family if I were to go home and say, I quit. You know, I can't do this. That was always an overriding factor also.
I want to talk about your family a little bit, because you talk about them a lot when you're giving speeches to folks, and you start a lot of times back with your grandmother and your grandfather. You break out pictures of the family being together, because there were a lot of kids in that family for those folks.
There were, yeah. My father, my grandparents on my father's side came from South Texas, and you know, my grandmother had 13 children, and you know, she was a housewife and a mother, and my grandfather was a janitor at Rice University. They were very, very simple people, humble people. My mother grew up on a farm in Central Texas, not too far from Shiner. And she was the youngest of 6 children, quit school in the 8th grade to go work on the farm. She picked cotton. So those were my beginnings, and I'm proud of that. I always look back on my family as what kind of developed me and turned me into who I am. Your dad graduated, I guess, high school in 1950 and decided a military career was the right thing, and then the world changed. Yeah, he did. He graduated in 1950 from Sam Houston High School in Houston, and 3 days later joined the Army, wanted to get out of the inner city and go see the world. And as luck would have it, in June of 1950, North Korea invaded South Korea. My father was in the Army, a young private, infantry, and in November 1950, his unit was sitting on the Yalu River, which is the boundary between China and North Korea. And he said they had moved so fast that it was cold. Here it was, it's November 1950. He goes, it was really cold, and we didn't have any winter clothes. We still had on our summer clothes, our summer uniforms. But in November 1950, China entered the war, and on November 1950, 300,000 Chinese came across the border. They overran my father's outfit, and they tried to fight their way back to friendly lines, and they got ambushed, and he got shot 5 times. And was subsequently taken prisoner of war, along with several others in his outfit, taken prisoner of war by the Chinese, and spent the next 33 months as a prisoner of war in Manchuria, China. You know, he was repatriated in 1953, and he weighed 70 pounds. And 1,500 men died in that prison camp. And he saw a lot of them go. And, you know, I can't imagine being 18, 19, 20 years old and living that experience. That's the kids you're in charge of right now. Exactly. And I just can you imagine that? Can you imagine your sons and daughters, you know, 18, 19, 20 years old, having to live that experience? For me, it still amazes me that he endured all that at that young age. Does he talk about how it changed him? He does. From time to time, he'll talk about, the experience. Even now, he'll get emotional talking about now his recollection of what happened, and more importantly for him, the men that were lost, men that he knew, men that his first platoon leader was an Aggie, and it was funny when I told him I was coming to Texas A&M, and he said, that's the same school that Lieutenant Mabry Kane went to. And he said, that's a good school. He goes, they produce good leaders, because that lieutenant was my dad's first platoon leader and died in my dad's arms in a mortar attack in Korea. And when he came back, he sought out Mabry Kane's mom and talked to her about her son and what a great leader he was and what he meant to my father.
Welcome back to Xplained.
1971, we settled in Houston, and I was in ninth grade. I started ninth grade there, so I did my high school years in Houston, inner city Houston.
And it was not an easy few years, I'm sure, for a number of reasons. Can you kind of give the lay of the land as far as where you grew up in?
I grew up in inner city Houston in a place called Magnolia Park. It's right there, inner city, right next to 2nd Ward and 3rd Ward, all Hispanic. All blue collar, all working class, but a very tough neighborhood. Very tough, a lot of gangs, a lot of drugs, all the ills that you hear about in the inner city. We had it there, and of course, my brother and I both got caught up in that somewhat.
Hard not to be.
It was hard not to, and it was, it was kind of a pseudo family, if you will, to be with all these guys and do some of the things we did. But it was part of surviving too. It was part of that existence of, you did what you had to do to survive in that environment. My brother was 4 years younger than me, got caught up in it a lot more than I did. I was lucky in that I got a chance to get away and go to college.
You had that band march through.
I did, and that again, a life-changing moment. You can talk about those kinds of moments throughout your life. That was one for me. My brother didn't have one of those and wound up going to prison for 2.5 years. That was tough for him, and it changed his life. He came out of there a different man, as I'm sure most do.
The band doesn't march through. Is that your life? Prison?
Yeah, it probably is, and I tell people that. There's no telling. If I hadn't come to Texas A&M, I probably wouldn't have gone to college. I probably would have stayed there, and there's no telling what could have happened. I'd either be in prison or dead. And I don't say that lightly, because I'm proud of the neighborhood I grew up in. I'm proud of the experiences I had. They shaped me in a lot of ways, developed me in a lot of ways, made me grow up a little bit faster. And I learned things that allowed me to survive in situations where maybe others may have had more of a difficult time.
Gangbangers don't aspire to be generals in the Army. What did you aspire to be? Anything?
Well, no, I hadn't really thought that much about it. I really didn't. My parents had always told me they wanted me to be the first member of our family to go to college. Well, if you looked at my high school transcripts, I wasn't necessarily thinking along the same lines. Thankfully, the academic standards back then were not nearly as rigorous as they are now. But I was fortunate in that I was able to get in. And that, again, that changed everything for me.
You bring up academic standards, though. Are there people in society nowadays that might not have the opportunity to be a Joe Ramirez because the academic standards are what they are?
I think there are. I think there are. And it's heartbreaking, because I go out there and I speak to a lot of high schools. And I talk to a lot of, underrepresented populations, African Americans, Hispanics, Asians, and it's amazing how many want to come to A&M and want to be in the Corps, but they academically they can't.
Because that's the first thing you have to tell them is
Exactly.
Get your grades in order.
Exactly.
You didn't necessarily have to get your grades in as much of an order as today's generation has to.
That's correct, and and I tell you, quite frankly, I'm trying to start earlier and earlier now. If I can talk to 9th graders and 10th graders, that's where I want to hit them and say, look, your grades starting in the 9th grade on count. And you need to start making grades. If you really want to come to A&M and be a member of the Corps, you need to start now. And it's heartbreaking, because I tell people, if every kid that wanted to come to A&M and join the Corps could get in, I'd have a Corps of 5,000 tomorrow. I mean, literally, I'd have 5,000 young men and women in our Corps of Cadets tomorrow. But the reality is a lot of them just don't have the academics to be able to get in.
You have a John Wooden quote that you use a lot that probably applies to that. Failure is not fatal, but failure to change might be.
That is correct. I use that one a lot when I talk about leadership and change because, you know, Texas A&M is a school that's rooted in tradition. I mean, we are ruthless about defending our traditions. But by the same token, A&M has changed and evolved over the years. It had to. We did the same thing with the Corps. We had to change and evolve to make it more current and more relevant. And it was one of those things where if we didn't, the Corps was dying a slow death. The Corps' numbers were going down. The Corps' relevance on campus had waned. Quite frankly, the Corps' reputation had waned also, especially on campus among the faculty and the administration.
Keepers of the Spirit weren't held in high regard.
No, we were not. And that bothered me, quite frankly. Coming back after being on for 31 years, I was very concerned about the way the Corps was viewed, not just off campus, but also on campus. And so we had to change things. We had some outdated ideas out there about tradition and leadership and what right looked like.
Still to come on Xplained.
It's one of the most gut-wrenching experiences of my life, something that I will never forget.
You grew up to an extent in the Vietnam War era, so you've got that perspective in a way that guides you in what America looked like during a war footing. That's the same that this current crop of cadets has when it comes to 9/11. In fact, you're a few years away from having the first cadets who grew up after 9/11 in their entire lives, or born after the attacks in 2001. How do you see 9/11 and the wars that followed, wars that you served in, how does that affect this current generation in your mind?
Well, first off, I will tell you that there are those that firmly believe that because less than 1% of the American population has served since 9/11, that we have a generation of young people that just don't have a propensity to serve. And I would offer that nothing could be further from the truth. The young people that I see in the Corps Cadets today are eager to serve, want to do something for the greater good. And whether that's in the military or working for the government or working in our communities or working for the state, they want to serve, they want to help. And I tell people all the time that this generation of young people is, number one, is far better than me when I was their age, but more importantly, they are far better prepared to handle the complexities of what they're going to see when they leave here than any other generation before them. I firmly believe that.
Is your perspective, though, tied to the fact that you are connected to A&M, which prides itself and makes a foundation of being a part of this university, whether it's the Corps or not, serving others and serving a community?
That's part of it. Part of it, though, is the fact that, you know, from 9/11 until I retired, you know, I led some phenomenal young men and women in the U.S. Army.
Into battle.
And exactly. And I got to tell you, you know, I've seen these young men and women do some incredible things under some very dire circumstances. And I am convinced that this generation of young people truly is a great generation of young people, that they do have a propensity to serve, and they do want to do good things for their country. Yeah, less than 1% have served, but I give all credit to those that do and have. And, you know, you've heard me tell the story about, you know, presiding over the funeral. When you do that, you realize just how committed some of these young men and women are.
You did 5 as a general officer.
I did 5, and it was probably, it's one of the most gut-wrenching experiences of my life, something that I will never forget. And I'm thankful for men and women like that, that are willing to step up and serve and pay the ultimate sacrifice so that we all enjoy the things that we do. I just hope we never take that for granted.
Yeah, we're sitting a few feet away, in fact, from a list of folks that have died since 9/11 who were Aggies.
That's correct. They're all members of the Corps. And, you know, there's about 30, 31 of them. And it's, you know, I look at that every day, and it reminds me of how important it is that we prepare these young men and women for whatever it is they're going to undertake, because there are credentials. They're going to go out there and they're going to represent this Corps and this university incredibly well. Your perception is that this is a generation that wants to serve. Why are other people's perceptions on that front incorrect in your mind, or why are they having that perception? I think, first off, I think we tend to be inundated with a lot of negative images of this generation.
It's a social media culture, so
it's social media, it's reality TV, you know, and we get inundated with so many negative images of this generation that we lose sight of the fact that, hey, the vast majority of these young men and women are very good people, and they really do want to do well for our country. I always tell, you know, folks from my generation that lament this generation and talk bad about them, I say, look, you know, if you have any doubts, go spend an hour on the quad. Go pick any cadet in uniform and just spend 30 minutes talking to them. Ask them their perspectives on the world, the future, you know, the state. Talk to them about anything you want, and trust me, I can almost guarantee you, you will come away from that experience saying, you know, if this young man or young woman is indicative of what's going to be leading our country in the future, we're going to be okay. Our country's in good hands. I firmly believe that. And again, part of that's shaped by my time here as a commandant, but part of it is also shaped by the young men and women I led in the military.
We appreciate you taking some time out for us, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
This has been Explained. Subscribe for free and download previous episodes from iTunes. You'll also find more of Explained at kbtx.com. This has been a presentation of KBTX Media, the Brazos Valley's news leader.